I was boiling water over a camping stove on my front porch when the first scream echoed down the block. At first, I thought it was just a child playing. But then came another scream. And another. The kind that curdled your blood, raw, panicked, desperate. I looked up and saw people standing on their rooftops, some waving frantically, others simply staring in shock. Smoke was rising in the distance. The gas line had blown. Somewhere down the street, a column of flame hissed and roared like a living thing. The pavement shimmered with heat, and the air stank of burning plastic. The entire block spiraled into chaos in minutes. Neighbors rushed out of their homes with soaked rags pressed to their mouths, shouting for help. Some tried to use garden hoses to cool down their houses. Others just stood there, stunned, as the power grid failed and the temperature inside their homes soared past 90 degrees. Phones stopped working. The taps ran dry. And by nightfall, what had once been a tidy, quiet neighborhood became a war zone of heat, confusion, and fear. Except for me, I had power. I had food. I had clean water. I had shelter. Because 2 weeks earlier, my camper, my carefully maintained, law-abiding, nothing-out-of-place camper, had been towed from my driveway. Not stolen. Not repossessed. Towed. Legally. By order of the neighborhood HOA. Or, more accurately, by Marla Henderson, the woman who chaired the HOA board and fancied herself the high priestess of suburban perfection. Marla was the kind of person who carried a beige clipboard like it was a badge of honor, the kind of person who believed that authority didn't need to be earned, only declared. She walked the neighborhood twice a day in her orthopedic sneakers, scanning every yard for violations of her sacred covenant, the HOA handbook. She smiled when she towed my camper. That smile still haunts me. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was a kind of tight-lipped, smug smirk that said, "I've won. You don't belong here. And I'll make sure everyone knows it." That's what started all this. Not a gas explosion. Not the summer blackout. Not even a failing infrastructure. It started with a smile. A cold, calculating smile from a woman who looked at my quiet, spotless camper and saw not a vehicle, but a threat. A challenge to her sterile little kingdom. And like every self-anointed monarch, she did what monarchs do best. She eliminated it. But the thing about taking away someone's peace, someone's last tether to the life they once had, is that you don't get to decide what happens next. You don't get to control how far they'll go to reclaim it, or how ready they'll be when the world around you finally falls apart. I didn't prep out of fear. I prepped out of spite. And it saved me. It was 3 days after Marla gave me that smile, that smug little twitch of her lips, when I found it, a single sheet of paper, taped to the side door of my camper. No envelope, no greeting, just a message printed in 12-point Times New Roman, like it had been pulled straight from a generic office memo template. Per HOA guidelines, all recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight. That was it. No signature. No attempt at civility. Just a demand disguised as a rule. I stood there in my driveway, coffee in one hand, reading that sentence over and over. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused, because I'd read those HOA guidelines front to back when I moved in. The same way you'd study a lease before signing, or the ingredients on a suspiciously cheap frozen meal. I wasn't about to start a new life after my wife's passing by stepping into a legal quagmire. According to Section 3, Paragraph 2, and yes, I'd highlighted it, recreational vehicles were permitted in driveways so long as they were in working condition and not used as permanent residences. Mine was spotless, well-maintained, moved every couple of months. I kept it tucked neatly on one side of the driveway, not a single inch over the sidewalk. It didn't block views. It didn't leak oil. It didn't scream, junkyard project. It was clean, quiet, and more than anything else, mine. So I responded in kind. I printed out the section of the bylaws that applied, highlighted the clause that proved I was within my rights, and taped it directly underneath Marla's notice. No insults, no sarcasm, just facts. 3 days later, she escalated. It started subtly. Marla began adjusting the route of her morning walks to pass by my house, twice, sometimes 3 times a day, always with her phone in hand, always pretending to be on a call, or checking an email. But I'd catch her out of the corner of my eye, tilting her phone to snap photos of the camper, zooming in, circling around, cataloging. One evening, just as the sun was dipping below the rooftops, I spotted her crouched near my mailbox. She was squinting, trying to get a clear shot of the license plate. I walked out and waved. She didn't wave back, just scurried off like a raccoon caught in a trash bin. Still, I tried. I gave her a chance. A week later, I approached her on one of her walks, asked if we could talk. Reasonable tone, open stance. I asked if she had any specific concerns, and if there was a compromise we could reach. Some kind of middle ground. She smiled again. That same barren, tight-lipped smile. Rules are rules, she said. If we let one camper stay, what's next? Boats? Chickens? Communes? She said chickens like it was a slur. Like the mere idea of a coop on a cul-de-sac was a declaration of war. Soon after, the official warning came in the mail. A formal violation notice, stamped with the HOA logo, typed in sterile language designed to sound polite, while delivering a threat. No fine, not yet. Just a friendly reminder that I was in violation and needed to take action. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to end on its own. Marla wasn't satisfied with a note. She wanted a battle, and she'd already picked a field. So I packed up a folder, photos of the camper, printed copies of the bylaws, my vehicle's registration, maintenance logs, and yes, a plate of homemade oatmeal raisin cookies. Because even in war, I believed in diplomacy. The HOA board meeting was held in a soulless, fluorescent-lit clubhouse that looked like it had been designed by a board accountant. 5 people sat at a plastic folding table in matching polo shirts, each with a name tag and an air of tired authority. It felt like I'd stumbled into a student government meeting for adults who still thought clip art was professional. When I walked in, Marla was already there, seated at the center like a judge at a talent show, her beige clipboard resting before her like a gavel. She saw the cookies and sneered. "Bribery won't sway this board," she said. I smiled. "They're oatmeal raisin. If anything, they're punishment." No one laughed. I made my case anyway. Clear, factual, respectful. I showed them that I was in compliance. I wasn't living in the camper. I wasn't running a business out of it. And I wasn't storing explosives or hoarding junk. I even offered to put up a screen or move it slightly if that helped. That's when Marla pulled out her folder. It was like she'd been waiting for that moment. She laid out photos, dramatic, zoomed in, probably color-corrected for maximum visual offense, and proposed an emergency revision to the HOA guidelines. Effective immediately, no campers were allowed in driveways. Period. No vote from the homeowners. Just the board. Her loyal little club nodded like bobbleheads and passed a motion on the spot. "You have 72 hours to remove it," Marla said, eyes gleaming, "or we'll have it towed." I didn't shout, didn't argue. I looked at her, really looked, and said 6 words. "You're making a mistake, Marla." She tilted her head. "No," she replied. "You made one when you parked that thing here in the first place." And that's when the rules changed. For her, for me, and for the entire neighborhood. Because she thought she'd won, but she'd just lit the match. I came home from the grocery store to find an oil stain where my camper used to be. No knock on the door. No phone call. Not even a damn courtesy notice taped to the garage like last time. Just a silence and absence. I stood there in the driveway, shopping bag still in hand, blinking like I'd misread the world. But there was no mistake. My camper, my sanctuary, was gone. At first, I thought it might have been stolen. But a quick scan of the garage door revealed a neatly folded notice taped just above the keypad. A printed copy of the revised HOA regulation. The new ruling, passed during Marla's little boardroom performance. Beneath it, in smaller print, was the name of the towing company, a reference number, and a note that read, "Removal in compliance with HOA Ordinance 14B, subsection 6.1. I called the number. After 40 minutes of hold music and 3 disconnected transfers, I finally got a voice on the line. The woman was polite but detached. The kind of person who'd spent years delivering bad news to angry voices. She confirmed that the camper had been impounded and taken to a storage lot outside town. Secure, monitored, accessible only during business hours. And expensive. Very, very expensive. Towing fees, daily storage fees, administrative fees, a $125 processing surcharge, and the kicker, a violation penalty under an emergency ordinance passed 3 days before the tow. The total came out to a figure that made my throat go dry. Paying it would hurt. Not paying it would mean surrendering the camper entirely. I hung up and stared at the driveway for a long time. I didn't cry. I'd already cried enough in that camper, curled up in its bunk, mourning my wife, staring at the photo we took in Yosemite the year before she got sick. That camper wasn't just a vehicle. It was memory and motion and grief wrapped into aluminum siding. And Marla had it towed like it was a rusted-out truck abandoned on a curb. The next morning I saw her. She was out in her front yard, pretending to prune her rose bushes, as if she hadn't orchestrated the whole thing, as if she hadn't stood by while the tow truck hooked my camper up and hauled it away. There was no guilt on her face, just that signature smirk, that clipped, superior smile of someone who believed herself untouchable. I walked past without a word, but I saw the way her eyes flicked toward me, triumphant, gloating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. Instead, I took notes. The very next day, I started watching. Not just her, the whole neighborhood. I noticed how Marla's fancy solar power garden lights barely worked, flickering at dusk, dead by midnight. I remembered how the HOA had banned backup generators last year after one guy used his during a storm, and a neighbor complained about the noise. I took stock of who had rain barrels. No one too unsightly, they'd said. I remembered how the city had been running gas line maintenance up and down our district for the past 6 months. Notices had gone out. Most of them, I knew, ended up unopened or tossed in recycling bins. And just like that, my grief turned to something else entirely. Resolve. I started preparing. Not because I was afraid, but because I was furious. I bought a portable generator and kept it at my brother's house across town. I stored fuel in legal quantities off-site. I created a bug-out box filled with canned food, bottled water, first aid supplies, portable chargers, and a weather radio. I found a collapsible tent and stashed it in the garage. I even invested in a foldable solar panel kit. I kept receipts, stored backups, labeled everything. And when the HOA announced surprise backyard inspections for unsightly emergency gear, I buried my supplies in plain sight, inside storage bins labeled holiday decorations. I wasn't hoarding. I wasn't prepping for the end times. I was just done being vulnerable, done letting someone like Marla strip away the few things that gave me peace, while hiding behind her laminated rules and suburban war tactics. She wanted a clean, orderly kingdom. Let her have it, because when the lights went out, when the gas lines cracked, when the fire came, I would be ready. And she would be standing in her perfect yard, holding a dead flashlight, wondering why no one came to help. It happened on the hottest day of the year. Not metaphorically. I mean, it literally shattered records. The asphalt shimmered like glass. You could smell the heat in the air, like sunburn and ozone, thick and oppressive. By noon, the cicadas had gone silent. By 3, the air was too heavy to breathe. And then the street groaned. It was a sound I'll never forget, like the spine of the earth cracking. A low, ominous creak that seemed to echo through the soles of my shoes. Then came the hiss, followed by a roar. A 6-foot column of fire erupted from the sidewalk across the street. Someone screamed. I stood frozen, coffee cup still in hand, as the heat wave slammed into my chest. It was like standing too close to a bonfire, except the bonfire was a gas line, and it had just split open like a wound. The explosion wasn't massive. No Hollywood fireball, no slow-motion debris. But it was enough. Enough to knock out the grid. Enough to shatter the illusion of order that Marla had clung to like a crown. Power died an hour later. The humming AC unit sputtered to silence. Refrigerators clicked off. Lights dimmed and didn't come back on. The neighborhood, so obsessed with image and appearance, began to peel at the edges. By nightfall, The water pressure was down to a whisper. Pipes groaned when faucets were turned. The air inside those picture-perfect homes turned stale and thick, like a sauna with no exit. People spilled out into their yards, dazed, sweating, scared. They fanned themselves with junk mail. They held on to smartphones like lifelines, though the signal had already vanished. Some walked up and down the block looking for answers. Others just stood in their driveways, blinking at the rising moon, like it might have advice. Marla, the one who'd built her castle of bylaws, tried to rally them. She stood at the edge of her lawn with a lantern in one hand and a stack of laminated emergency response guidelines in the other. I watched her blow a whistle no one listened to. She barked instructions like it was a fire drill, but people ignored her because what they needed wasn't a whistle. It was water. It was food. It was power. It was everything I had and everything they didn't. As for me, I rolled out my canopy. I unfolded a camp chair. I lit the camping stove I'd bought in quiet defiance, and I started boiling water. Not because I needed to, but because I could, and for a few bitter moments, I let myself enjoy the irony, the taste of it, the justice of it. Then I heard her, Marla. Her voice floated down the street, brittle and cracking. She was standing at the end of my driveway now, holding her useless lantern like a surrender flag. There's a gas leak near my property line, she said, voice trembling. It's getting worse. They're evacuating the East Row. She looked around, wild-eyed. No clipboard, no command, just panic. Then she saw me. She saw the stove, the tent, the glow of soft lantern light, the calm. And she asked a question I never thought I'd hear. Can I stay here with you? I didn't answer. Not right away. Because something else had caught my eye. Just behind her, beneath the cracked pavement near her mailbox, a small red light was blinking. It pulsed steadily, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. I stared at it, my mind racing. Was it sensor? Old wiring? A utility marker no one had flagged? Or something far worse? I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. Because whatever it wasn't my problem. Not anymore. Not after everything she'd done to make me feel small. To make me feel like a nuisance in my own home. To punish me for grieving the wrong way. So I turned my eyes back to the kettle, now whistling gently over flame. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Black. Steaming. And with all the calm in the world, I took a sip, while Marla stood there, sweating and wordless, waiting for mercy she hadn't earned. The next morning, I woke up to the soft hum of my portable fan brushing cool air against my face. Outside the tent I'd pitched behind my house, the sun was already a searing presence in the sky, but inside it was calm, shaded, still. I sat up, cracked open a fresh water bottle, and boiled a quick bowl of oatmeal over the stove. As I poured myself another cup of coffee, I noticed them, neighbors. They didn't come in crowds or with fanfare. They trickled in, quiet, hesitant. First, it was a couple from 2 houses down, the DeVises. She held her phone in one hand and an empty water jug in the other. Do you, by any chance, have a phone charger? She asked, eyes darting toward my power bank. Then came the Morales family, who lived across the cul-de-sac. Their son had heat rash creeping up his arms. They didn't ask for much. Just water. Maybe a place to sit in the shade. I nodded, wordlessly. I wasn't cruel. I didn't slam the door or gloat or ask if they remembered signing the petition Marla had passed around last fall about maintaining community standards. I just handed over what I could spare. And for a while, that was enough. But Marla, she didn't return until later that afternoon. And she looked worse than before. Her posture was slumped, like her spine had lost the will to hold her up. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands. Her skin was flushed and glossy with sweat. And when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like old wood. I hate to ask, she said, barely meeting my eyes, but do you have any supplies? She tried to mask the plea with dignity. Said it like she was borrowing flour. Like this wasn't survival, just inconvenience. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked a question of my own. What happened to your emergency kit? She blinked. Then, honest to God, she said, I didn't think we'd ever need one. And in that moment, everything clicked. The rules, the laminated sheets, the uniform lawns, the ban on solar panels, backup generators, even water barrels. It was all cosmetic. Everything in this neighborhood. The image of order of control was just a layer of fresh paint on a hollow frame. No real plans. No real backbone. Just newsletters and posturing. Marla had spent years policing mailbox paint and trash bin placement. But when it mattered, when reality cracked the facade, she had nothing. And she knew it. I didn't turn her away. Not outright. I said, I'll think about it. Because I wanted her to feel what I had felt. That helplessness. That waiting. That realization that the rules she clung to so desperately couldn't save her anymore. That night, more neighbors showed up. Some came bearing trade. Canned food for batteries. Extra diapers for water. One woman brought a bottle of wine from her pantry, unopened and warm, as if it were still worth something. And slowly, something strange happened. A community began to form. Not the forced, artificial kind Marla had tried to impose through bylaws and meetings, but the real kind, born of need and empathy and shared struggle. People brought folding chairs, shared stories under the shade of my awning. Kids played with flashlights and empty water jugs like they were toys. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And Marla, she sat on her porch alone, watching, not speaking, not ordering, just observing. Like a dethroned queen staring at the bonfire of her own kingdom. By day 2, the city finally broke its silence. A terse bulletin crackled through emergency channels and battery radios. Gas lines will remain off for at least 5 days. Power is being rerouted, but no ETA. Residents are advised to evacuate if possible. The problem? No one could evacuate. Roads were blocked off for safety inspections. Gas stations had either run dry or were rationing fuel under military supervision. Everyone was stuck, baking in their homes, boiling over with frustration, and teetering on the edge of collapse. Tempers flared. A shouting match broke out 2 houses down over who had hoarded the last case of bottled water. Someone threw a lawn gnome. Yes, a ceramic gnome sailed across a driveway like a warning shot. Civil society was unraveling, ornament by ornament. And through it all, Marla tried desperately to retake her throne. She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac with a megaphone, flanked by her clipboard loyalists, declaring a neighborhood recovery coordination committee. She asked residents to register their remaining supplies for shared resource management. No one listened, not even the kids. By that afternoon, I made my move. I had called in a favor. A buddy of mine, flatbed truck owner, dependable, quiet, rolled in with my camper, strapped securely and gleaming in the sunlight like a knight returning from exile. It had cost me extra, but I didn't care. The look on Marla's face? Indescribable. She was across the street, holding a jug of water like it might leak status. Her mouth opened and closed, her arms twitching slightly like she wanted to protest, to shout violation into the void. But there was no HOA anymore. No rules left to enforce. The bylaws were null in a disaster zone, and I had already cleared it with the city's emergency inspector earlier that morning. He had taken one look at my generator, my fuel logs, my prep list, and said, "Honestly, you're the most put-together person on this block." He gave me temporary authorization to operate the camper as a mobile emergency unit, and that was all I needed. I backed it into my driveway, slowly, deliberately, like I was reclaiming sacred ground. The generator kicked on with a low purr. The AC spun to life. The scent of actual cooked food, hot rice, warm beans, even a dash of seasoning, drifted into the street. And one by one, people returned. Not just for water or help, but for something they hadn't had since the crisis began. Relief. Real, tangible relief. Kids sat under the awning playing cards. A couple used my power bank to FaceTime with distant family for the first time in days. One elderly man cried, not out of sadness, but out of sheer gratitude after I handed him a cold compress and a folding chair. And Marla, she watched from the sidewalk, Alone. Clipboard gone. Crown cracked. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. I just opened the windows and let the smell of dignity cook on low heat while she stood in the ruins of the empire she'd built from HOA printouts and passive aggression. Just as the neighborhood began to steady itself, as fans hummed, as water was shared without fuss, as fear gave way to cooperation, Marla struck again. And this time, she didn't come with a megaphone. She came with a clipboard. Not her own. Mind you, this one belonged to a man in a city-issued vest with an ID badge clipped to his chest. He looked tired, overworked, and very much like someone who had no interest in being here. But there he stood, beside Marla, as she gestured dramatically toward my driveway. I watched from under the camper awning, a bottle of water halfway to my lips, as he scribbled something onto a form. My gut twisted. They walked up together, her smugness practically glowing. "You're in violation again," she said. Her voice was hoarse from the heat, but the malice was sharp. Temporary emergency doesn't mean you can just break city codes. I looked at the inspector, trying to read his expression. He didn't look accusatory, just resigned. That's when he said something that stopped me cold. "We received a complaint about an illegal fuel storage barrel on the property," he said. "We're required to investigate." My mind raced. Fuel? On my property? No, absolutely not. I'd been meticulous. I kept my supplies off-site for a reason. Then it hit me. Marla, even now, especially now, she had the gall to try to get me shut down. She filed a false report in the middle of an emergency. It was impressive, really, like watching a petty tyrant cling to power by her fingernails. "Do you mind if I take a look?" the inspector asked, already stepping toward the side of my house. Of course I minded, but I said, "Be my guest," and gestured broadly. "If you find any illegal fuel, I'll eat the camper." Marla hovered behind him, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching with laser focus, like she expected him to find a smoking gun beneath my tomato plants. I walked beside the inspector, calmly pointing out my solar panel array, my water storage containers, even showing him the laminated receipts for the camper's redeployment, all cleared through the proper channels. He nodded as he checked, quiet, methodical. Then he asked, "Where's your fuel stored?" I handed him the storage unit rental agreement I kept in my glove compartment. "Off-site," I said. "Always has been. Unlike some people." I read the fine print. That's when Marla snapped. "Check the shed," she barked, lunging forward like a prosecutor mid-trial. "He's hiding it in the shed. That thing reeks of chemicals. I've smelled it. I've told people." The inspector raised an eyebrow. I shrugged. "It's where I keep gardening tools and some paint cans. You're welcome to look, but I'm warning you, it's messy." We walked to the back, past the cracked stepping stones and the tense shadows stretching under the late afternoon sun. I unlocked the shed and swung the doors open. Inside, a broken lawn chair, rusted hedge clippers, a couple of half-used cans of paint, and a stack of ant traps. That was it. No fuel, no barrel, no chemical stockpile. Just the usual suburban clutter, dusty and disappointing. The inspector looked once, then twice, then stepped back. "Well," he said, slowly flipping his clipboard closed, "everything seems in order here." He gave me a tired smile. "Sorry for the disruption." "No need to apologize," I said, my gaze fixed on Marla. "Some people just panic when they're not in control." Her mouth opened, a sharp retort poised on the tip of her tongue, but she thought better of it. She spun on her heel and stormed off down the sidewalk, her footsteps brittle and uneven, like she was trying not to limp from her own embarrassment. The inspector handed me my receipt and offered one final word before he left. "Honestly," he said under his breath, "you're doing more for this neighborhood than the actual emergency response teams right now. Don't let them get to you." Too late for that. Marla had already gotten to me, but not in the way she thought. She hadn't broken me. She built me into someone ready for a fight. The sun didn't let up. Day turned into another blistering night, the kind where even the wind felt like it had passed through a furnace. The generator hummed steadily beside my camper, its rhythm a lullaby for the half-dozen people now sleeping inside. 3 families, 2 elderly neighbors, and one baby who hadn't stopped crying until we cooled him with damp cloths and a borrowed fan. The scent of garbage was starting to rot the air. With trash pickups suspended and no power for refrigeration, the sidewalk stank of sour milk, meat gone bad, and rotting fruit. Civility peeled away like old paint. People weren't waving anymore. They weren't talking over fences or checking on the elderly couple at the end of the block. They were hoarding, snapping, bargaining like it was a marketplace in the apocalypse. And still, I watched Marla. She hadn't left her house since the city inspector walked off my lawn. But at night, you could see her silhouette through the window, pacing. Candles flickered weakly behind her blinds. I knew the smell of wilted power when I saw it. Hers had evaporated like the water pressure in our pipes. The next day, another main burst, this time the far end of the neighborhood. The little trickle we'd been surviving on vanished completely. Faucets gave nothing but dry gasps. Even the wealthier homes with filtered pitcher systems ran dry. By late afternoon, the air tasted like copper and smoke. Then came the knock, not on the camper door, on the side window. I pulled back the shade, and there she was, Marla, not standing tall this time, not barking orders or flanked by her clipboard brigade, just standing, arms limp at her sides. Her blouse stuck to her body with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her lips looked cracked. Her eyes didn't carry fire anymore. They carried something heavier. Defeat. "I need help," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, just water. A cold compress. My daughter's here. She's not used to this kind of heat. She's not doing well." That stopped me. Her daughter? I didn't even know she had one. I looked past Marla and saw the girl, maybe 14, maybe younger, leaning against a porch railing, her face pale and shiny with sweat, her chest rising and falling in fast, shallow breaths. And just like that, the anger in my gut cracked. Because this wasn't about Marla anymore. This was about survival. I didn't speak. I just reached behind me, grabbed a chill bottle of water, and handed out the window. Marla took it with both hands like it was holy. Her eyes dropped, ashamed, grateful. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Not loud enough for the others to hear. Just enough for me. She didn't ask to come inside. Didn't push. She walked back across the yard like a ghost and handed the water to her daughter, who took it with trembling hands. I sat back down, numb. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't proud. I was just tired. This wasn't what victory was supposed to feel like. I'd survived. I'd prepared. I'd done everything right. But there was no joy in watching someone crawl back after trying to ruin you. Not when they did it broken. Not when a kid was wilting in their shadow. That night, as the wind howled dry warnings through the trees and smoke drifted in from beyond the hills, I checked the camper's vents, secured the supplies, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't, because Marla was still out there, no longer the queen of the cul-de-sac, just a mother with no backup plan, and a house that no longer protected her. And for the first time, I felt something I never thought I'd feel for her pity. The wind changed at 2:47 a.m. I remember because the camper creaked. Not loudly, but enough to jolt me awake. I sat up, blinked at the blinking LED thermometer on my lantern, and immediately noticed a shift. The air felt heavier, electric, and there was a smell I hadn't sensed before. Smoke, not the faint, campfire on the breeze kind. This was sharp, dry, bitter, the kind that wrapped around your throat and whispered, "Run." I scrambled out of the camper, barefoot and alert, and scanned the horizon. And there it was, far beyond the trees, but visible now, a soft, flickering glow just over the ridge. Orange, alive. It wasn't here yet, but it wasn't far either. The wildfire we'd feared had finally found its path. That's when I saw the lights, flashing red and blue, parked along the fence line behind Marla's house. A police cruiser and a city utility truck. The engines were off, the sirens silent, but the presence alone was enough to draw attention. And there she was, Marla, standing between them, flailing her arms, pointing, arguing, at me. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her gestures were unmistakable, frantic, erratic, and aimed directly at my camper. She was pointing like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup, Even now? Even with the fire on its way and her daughter struggling to breathe inside a blackout-stricken house, she was still trying to get me shut down? I grabbed my folder of documents, laminated receipts, emergency permissions, inspection reports, fuel storage leases, and stepped outside. The officer noticed me first and gave a weary nod as I approached. Marla whirled around, finger extended like a sword. "There he is," she snapped. "He's stockpiling. I've seen people going in and out of his property with gas cans. I swear he's hiding illegal fuel. He's putting us all at risk." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a woman unraveling, a woman so desperate to claw back even an ounce of control that she'd burn the last bridge still standing in a burning town. The officer thumbed through my documents, quiet and patient. When he finished, he handed them back. "Everything checks out," he said. "We're not here to cite anyone. We're advising residents to prepare for possible evacuation. There's a brush fire about 2 miles out. Wind's not in your favor. Could reach the perimeter by morning." Marla's face drained to what little color remained. "Evacuate? How? The roads are still blocked." "We're working on clearing a corridor," the officer replied, "but it's not guaranteed. You may need to shelter in place until dawn." That last part hit like a bell. Shelter in place. In this heat, with no power, with her daughter already gasping for air in a stifling house. Marla turned to me. Her voice was no longer angry. It was brittle. You have a vehicle," she said, barely above a whisper. "You can get out. You have air. You have power. Please don't leave us behind." I didn't say anything. Not right away. I turned and walked back to the camper. My mind raced. I did a quick inventory of what I had, how many I could reasonably fit, how long the fuel would last. I could take some people. Not all. And Marla? I didn't want to see her face again, let alone offer her refuge. But that night, as I stood in the camper doorway, smoke licking the sky and fear settling over the neighborhood like ash, I made the call. I opened the door, and I told the neighbors who had children, who were elderly, who needed shelter more than pride to come inside. No drama, no HOA rules, and no Marla. She stood at the edge of the driveway, her arms wrapped around herself, watching as people trickled into the one place in the neighborhood where the lights were still on. The Queen of Willow Creek, left out in the dark. By 4 a.m., the sky had turned the color of dried blood. The fire had crept closer, not roaring, not explosive, but creeping like a slow, inevitable tide. The ridge was lit up now, and the dry wind carried its heat straight into our lungs. Inside the camper, people whispered in the dark, trying not to panic. Children clung to parents. Someone silently passed around crackers. Another fanned a woman who'd nearly fainted from the heat. We were out of jokes, out of illusions. The neighborhood, once so obsessed with outward appearances, had been stripped to its bones. That's when the knock came. Soft, hesitant. I opened the camper door and found Marla standing there, not flanked by her clipboard or cronies, but alone. She looked translucent, her blouse soaked through, her hair matted to her face. Her lips were cracked, her hands trembled. "My daughter," she said, barely holding herself upright. "She's struggling. She can't breathe. It's the heat. I don't know what to do." I looked past her, and there she was, the teenager, sitting slumped against their porch railing, her face a sickly shade of gray, breathing in short, panicked gasps. For a long, bitter moment, I said nothing, because I remembered the note, the photos, the way she stood and smiled while my camper, my sanctuary, was dragged out of my life. But then I looked again at the girl, and I made my choice. I stepped aside. Only her daughter came in. Marla stayed outside, hovering near the edge of the camper light, like a ghost. I handed the girl a bottle of water, wrapped her in a wet cloth, and placed her in front of the fan. Slowly, color returned to her face. Her breathing evened. Her eyes opened. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her mother whispered something, too quiet for me to catch, and retreated into the shadows of her yard. That night, no one slept. We listened to radio updates. We checked the winds. We waited. By sunrise, the city had managed to clear a narrow corridor for evacuation. A single shuttle rolled into the neighborhood, dusty and dented, its driver shouting instructions through a megaphone. Families climbed aboard, carrying their lives in duffel bags and plastic crates. I helped them load, then hitched the camper to my truck, ready to follow the shuttle out. That's when the city official pulled up. A plain man in a rumpled uniform stepped out his car, handed me an envelope, and said, "You've been commended." Apparently, multiple neighbors had submitted reports about how I'd offered shelter, food, and power during the blackout. The city had investigated. They deemed my camper a designated mobile emergency response unit, which meant one thing: it could legally remain on my property. Permanently. HOA rules? Irrelevant. In fact, the city had opened an investigation into whether the HOA, under Marla's leadership, had violated emergency preparedness statutes. I almost laughed. Marla didn't. She was across the street, standing beside her withered rose bushes, the same spot where she'd watched my camper get towed weeks ago. But this time, she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were hollow. Her shoulders sagged. She looked like someone who'd been carved out from the inside. The final blow came 2 days later. An emergency election was called. Marla was voted out unanimously. I didn't run. I didn't need to. The neighborhood was already changing, not because of rules, but because of people, stripped of the fake order and plastic unity. Folks were beginning to talk to each other again, to help each other, to wave for real this time. Power returned. Gas lines were fixed. The lawns turned green again. But Marla disappeared from the HOA Facebook group, from her daily walks, from the leadership she once wore like a crown. Her house went up for sale quietly. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, the best revenge is a hot cup of coffee, brewed over your own stove, on your own property, while the person who tried to erase you has to watch you become the leader they never could be. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted peace, a place to grieve, to rebuild. But life rarely gives us what we want. Sometimes, it gives us exactly what we need. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you the last word. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever faced off against an HOA tyrant like Marla, would you have let her in? Thanks for watching.